Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we're working to restore real classical Catholic education. And what we mean by that is very, very simple. We're seeking to restore the actual system of studies that was developed and studied and taught by wise men and saints in Catholic history. It's very, very simple. And while the mission is simple, the actual work is difficult because it requires us to do the research of actually going back, finding the resources, understanding the resources, sometimes translating the resources, since most of the teaching materials are only available in Latin in old books, and then working to make those studies available to modern students, because we believe that classical Catholic education is a timeless and trustworthy education. It's an education that will never change, because man never changes, and God, who's the object of that education, God never changes. So education, at least in its core principles and source materials and content, true education will never change. And yet in modern schools, that core of true education is non-existent. And so we're seeking in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy to restore real classical Catholic education. As a father, I want to provide my children, as far as I'm able to, with the same education that the saints that I admire in church history would have received, or would have given to their children when it was their turn to educate as parents. That's what I want as a Christian father, and I know that for most Christian parents, that's what they want when they talk about classical education. They want to give their children a timeless and trustworthy, proven, historical education. And that's what we're working to restore in the academy. Now, the biggest problem that parents have is that since the 1990s, something that I call the fake classical education movement has gone around telling Christian parents that this and that is what was done in history, and they just make stuff up. It's complete baloney. They're basically selling modern books and study materials, offering modern private school programs, charging tons of money, and telling parents falsely that they are giving their children the same education, at least in its core, in its principles and content. They're giving their children the same education that saints in the past enjoyed and gave to their children. And it's just completely false advertising. There's no evidence for these claims that they make. And this movement, which has been at work since the 1990s, has spread all over the place. And unfortunately, parents have sort of put on a display of embarrassing incompetence in asking questions or discerning or seeking proof that any of these claims are even true. They've just gobbled it up because it's different. And unfortunately, they've gotten duped by this, and the consequences are what they are. I've been going through these videos to show that the handful of principles, the handful of red flags, as I said, that identify this fake classical education movement can be found in all of the videos and articles that they publish. You don't have to dig for them. You don't have to be some kind of logical master or wizard to find the problems. They're explicit and right on the surface, easy to see. And I've talked about them in 2 previous videos. And before we watch this video, let's talk about them again so we have them in mind before we get started. I said there were 5 or 6 red flags to look for. One of them, the most glaring and ridiculous, is the idea that grammar, logic, and rhetoric are different stages or parts of a K-12 education. I mean, there's nothing that could be more ridiculous. There was no such thing as a K-12 education ever in history before the 1850s when the public schools were invented. There was never this long, age 5 to 18 system of education. And so when we divide it into elementary school, middle school, and high school, and this fake education movement, fake classical education movement, simply renames those 3 stages of the education. Instead of calling them elementary, middle, and high school, they rename them grammar, logic, and rhetoric. That's just the cheapest marketing gimmick I could imagine. It's what Starbucks did, as I said in a previous video. It's what Starbucks did in renaming the sizes of the drinks. Just a cheap way to get some attention, create some buzz, get people talking, using some new words. Now you feel like you're part of some kind of club, and people like that stuff. It's marketing. We see that this fake classical education movement does the same thing with the names of elementary, middle, and high school. They rename them using these old names, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. That's red flag number 1, using grammar, logic, and rhetoric as stages of learning, which is just complete irrational nonsense, as I'll show you later on, because we're going to take a look at the curriculum that's actually published by this speaker's organization after we watch this video. The second red flag is a downplay of the importance of systematic instruction from master teachers. When we get into this fake classical education movement, there are no teachers of a real classical education. There are no masters of real classical education. It's usually a bunch of good-intentioned parents who want to promote Westernish Christian values among their children. Nothing wrong with that. But they take up this fake classical education movement, and they say, the leaders and publishers, the school administrators, they say, it's no big deal that we don't have any masters because we don't teach through lectures. That's the modern way. That's the bad way of teaching. We don't teach by means of lectures. We teach by the so-called Socratic Method. And they talk about the Socratic Method, again, using this phrase from history with no connection to its original context or meaning. They use it as a new name for classroom discussion. That's all that it is. They have classroom discussions where the teachers, who are not qualified in the first place and can't teach the arts and sciences systematically, simply discuss readings with the students and get paid for just hosting class discussions. And they pretend that this method of teaching is actually some kind of strategic method that was used by wise men of the past. Again, this is just complete baloney, just taking the phrase Socratic Method out of context and using it to rename what we simply call class discussion. And then downplaying the importance of masterful formal instruction and the need for textbooks and things like that. They actually boast, we don't study textbooks. We study the great books. Well, the problem is that the books that are necessary for classical education, they were textbooks. That's what they are. So there's just craziness regarding how the courses should be taught, and they get into this use of the phrase Socratic Method to explain away why there are no master teachers to be found. The third red flag we talked about was the use of marketing catchphrases. We've already seen a couple of these in the first 2 points, but another one that runs through all these videos is this shallow reference to truth, goodness, and beauty. They take the phrase out of its historical context. In its historical context, truth, goodness, and beauty referred to God himself as the object of contemplation. So when we talk about monks and nuns who are contemplatives and they seek to know God through contemplation and prayer, they seek to know him who is truth, goodness, and beauty. And everything else simply shares in those attributes in some way, as St. Thomas explains. But truth, goodness, and beauty refers to God. And the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty is seeking the knowledge of God through contemplation. They take the phrase truth, goodness, and beauty, rip it out of that sacred context, and drag it through the mud, as it were. They refer to truth simply as some arrogant opinion about the superiority of Western civilization. They talk about goodness as mere Christian morality, moralizing the Christian faith, which is one of the common errors in Christian society, turning Christianity into a source of morals rather than a transforming, power-giving relationship with God himself, where we partake of the divine nature through faith and the sacraments. They reduce Christianity to a mere moral code to be followed, usually by European people. And then for beauty, they talk about material things. They talk about aesthetics. They talk about the beauty of the works of art in a museum. They talk about the beauty of random pieces of music, classical music. Not classical music in the true classical sense, but what we refer to when we talk about Mozart and Bach and so forth. Music being beautiful, decorating your home, making your home beautiful, taking care of your body, making yourself beautiful. It's a shallow materialistic misuse of the phrase in its historical context in which it referred to God himself. So truth, goodness, and beauty is another one of these catchphrases that are ripped out of context and used for the sake of marketing. We also talked about historical claims that are made with no evidence. We talk about how the fake classical education movement says this and this and this were done in the past. This is how they did it in the old days. This is how it was done in ancient Greece and Rome. This is what Christians did in the past. And for all of these assertions, all of these assurances given to parents who don't necessarily know, there's no evidence given to back up these claims, and parents foolishly trust without asking for evidence. So we'll see historical claims used as proof for different things, but no actual proof that these things are in fact historical. That's another problem. Another one is ridiculous promises of results that are to be expected when you change your curriculum. They'll talk about raising saints or raising virtuous men and women, as if any educational program brings with it, at the expense of tuition, brings with it the power to actually transform human souls and give grace that produces virtue. All of that talk of faith and grace and the sacramental life and the need for conversion, all of these spiritual realities, they have no place in this book-selling business of homeschool curriculum publishing. Parents are told and assured that if they invest in this curriculum and buy these products, this is what they need to raise virtuous adults. And the reason why the public schools or modern schools don't raise virtuous people, which they do, that never gets talked about. I'm a public school graduate. I believe that I could present myself as a faithful Christian person. I had a public school education. I attended a public university. So obviously education is not the cause of virtue. Education is not the cause of a transformed life. And yet we'll see these booksellers and homeschool marketers simply telling their parents that the solution to your children's behavioral problems is that you're just buying the wrong books, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's not how life works. So we'll see these common themes, these common red flags again and again and again. The last one I need to mention is a reference to the great books, a reference to what are called great books, which has no real definition. There's no canon of great books, as it were, but it just becomes a key phrase that is used to sell boxes and boxes and boxes of books. Not just the classics that are necessary for formal classical education, but all kinds of books, all kinds of books, some old, some new, mostly new, junk paperbacks, all kinds of modern books, catalogs, hundreds of pages in catalogs, books and books and books and books, and all of this book buying is justified by referring to some tradition of studying the so-called great books. But like I said, there's no canon of great books. No one knows what the great books are. It just means buy lots of books. And it's important to note that St. John Henry Newman warned about this when he wrote on the idea of the university. He said, in an age like this where books abound, it is common, and this is paraphrasing, it's common for men to imagine that a love of reading, which is just lazy idleness, like surfing the web or watching television, that the love of reading is real study. That's what St. John Henry Newman warned about when he wrote on education in the 1800s. This interest in book collecting, library building, constantly reading new books, it's like flicking through the channels on the television. It's not real study. And yet, this is what's promoted by booksellers, and they do it by telling parents that back in the old days, what kids did was they just read and read and read and read, even though the printing press didn't even exist until the 1400s. And even when it did come into existence, kids still didn't have books available or anything like that. So it's just a historical impossibility. But that's the kind of stuff we run into in these videos. So you've got 4 or 5 or 6 different things to look at. One more before we get started is just there's always a reference to certain ideas in classical education, like the speakers will name the 7 classical liberal arts. But that's it. It doesn't go any deeper. There's no substance in this talk. There's sort of a reference in passing as we move on to our real subject, which is book sales. So as we go through this video here, this is What is Classical Education by Dr. Christopher Perrin. I don't know Dr. Christopher Perrin. I have no idea who he is, where he comes from. I'm not a member of this homeschool crowd, this homeschool conference crowd. I don't go to the homeschool conferences, don't sell stuff at book tables or anything like that. I don't know these people, and that's irrelevant because I'm not interested in any personal criticisms. I'm concerned with the claims that are going to come out of his mouth and whether or not they're true, whether or not they come with any evidence, whether or not they can be supported with any knowledge of Catholic history or philosophy or theology. I'm concerned with the claims that are made, that parents are listening to, that are being made to parents who don't necessarily know these things, and to consider whether the claims are actually true or not. So I don't care who the speaker is or what his background is, don't care if he's a nice guy, don't care if he's a fellow Catholic. Those are not my concerns. My concerns are the claims themselves. So we're going to walk through this video together, keeping an eye out for those red flags and evaluating the claims that are made about what classical education is by this speaker, Dr. Christopher Perrin. Before I get started here, as I even look at this video, if you watched the previous video I did on what is classical education by Martin Cawthron of Memoria Press, I pointed out that in the background in that Martin Cawthron video, there was a shelf of books that I told you you'll see again and again in this fake classical education movement. I told you they were the Encyclopedia Britannica series called the Great Books series. It has nothing to do with any real classical collection of master works from the great teachers of classical education. It's simply a collection of books, like a Reader's Digest collection of books from history that Encyclopedia Britannica thought would please the largest possible audience in selling them. And I know about this book series because my in-laws have a copy on their TV stand in their living room. And that's what it is. It's like an encyclopedia collection. It's meant to be some cute decoration, a collection of books that really has no principle behind it. If you go through the books in the series, it'll have good things like St. Augustine and then St. Thomas Aquinas, and it'll have some of the works of Aristotle, some of the works of Plato. It has some of the works of Shakespeare, but then there's just all kinds of junk mixed in with it. You've got the writings of Lucretius, for example. You've got the Greek plays of Aristophanes, which is immoral literature that no Catholics would have read in the past. You've got the writings of Francis Bacon, who is the arch anti-Catholic, anti-scholastic father of modern scientific learning. You've got Newton, you've got John Locke, all kinds of junk in this collection, both ancient and modern. And yet, because it's an impressive book collection that undiscerning parents won't even be able to or I should say, parents won't even be able to identify the authors of these books or know what they've written about. It's set up as a prop by the fake classical education movement to look impressive. And the reason I mention that is because in the background here, and I didn't plan this, it just happens. In the background here, you see those same books that I talked about in the last video. This is just the cheesy Encyclopedia Britannica series of the so-called great books. This is not some kind of real academic collection of classics. They're English translations. It's not even, if you wanted to see an impressive book collection, maybe the Loeb Classics published by Harvard University Press, where you've got the original Greek and Latin texts. That might be impressive for someone who wanted to look like a classicist. But to have this cheesy Encyclopedia Britannica set of books in the background, it just sort of mocks the ignorance that's expected in the parents who won't understand what the source of these books is. It's just an encyclopedia collection that was published for sale probably back in the 70s or 80s. But anyway, I think it's funny that as we get started, and I mentioned that you should keep an eye out for that set of books, because it's the set of books that's just used as a prop in these fake classical education videos. There it is in the very next video we happen to look at. So let's watch this video, What is Classical Education by Dr. Christopher Perrin, and then we're going to take a look at the website that his program has and what they actually, after all this talk about classical education, what do they actually sell people? What are they actually doing? We're going to take a look at that after we watch this. So we'll try to move through this, but I know I'm going to stop quite a bit. I'll try to stop as little as possible so we can get through this and then look at the actual products for sale. So let's watch this video.
Hi, this is Dr. Christopher Perrin with Classical Academic Press, attempting to answer an impossible question in a brief period of time.
All right, we'll stop right there. This self-introduction where a man introduces himself as one who is called upon, as if someone forced him to make this video, to answer a question that's impossible to answer, it's just rhetoric. The question, what is a classical education, is not an impossible question. It's a very simple question. The question is simply, what did Christians study in history? What did the saints study? What did the wise men of history study and teach? It's a very simple question, and the answer has a simple historical answer. Let's go back in time and look and see, because we have the resources, let's go back and look and see what they studied. So to start this talk with this rhetorical, smoke and mirrors introduction is just setting parents up to have very low expectations, because after all, answering the question is impossible, right? So you're just going to have to accept whatever happens to be offered here. But if the question is impossible, why make the video? The video has a goal. It has a clear purpose. Obviously, it's not to tell us that it's impossible to explain what a classical education is. And just to provide an alternative to this, let me show you something real quick. If we go over to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website, bear with me for a second here. If we go to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website, let me just get these tabs out of the way. If you want to know what classical education is, it's very simple. Go to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website, click on the curriculum link, and there it is. That's classical education. You can learn everything you need to know about the education itself. You can learn everything you need to know about the curriculum on one web page. Every part of the curriculum is explained. Historical sources are provided, and links to the actual courses where we teach the actual classical curriculum are right there. It's all on one page. So why would someone introduce the discussion with this rhetorical talk about the question being impossible, and we're really not sure where we'd even begin or how we could possibly answer the question? This is all just a bunch of baloney. It's a very simple question to answer. Like I said, the hard part is going back and digging up the resources and learning how to actually use them. Understanding what classical education is, it's very simple. And in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we explain it in black and white on one web page for you to read through. So this is just rhetoric, making it seem like this is some lofty, impossible subject that poor parents can't possibly understand. And, condescendingly, I'll come down and do my best to try to explain this to you, since, you can't possibly understand this, you being just normal people. It's a bunch of baloney. It's very simple for you as a parent to understand what a classical education is.
An impossible question
Not
in
an
a brief
impossible
period
question.
of time. That question is, what is classical education?
This is all rhetoric.
Here's my attempt at the impossible.
All rhetoric.
Classical education is a traditional education, commenced by the Greeks and Romans.
Okay, stop there. Here you have a red flag. You have a very explicit historical appeal. This education that he's talking about, and again, we're going to go look at his actual program after we watch this video. So he's telling us that what he's selling today to homeschool families is something that was commenced by the ancient Greeks and Romans. So we have a right to ask, where among the ancient Greeks and Romans do we see a study program that looks like the study program that he's going to be selling to Catholic parents or to Christian parents? Where is this curriculum among the Greeks and Romans? Because it's claimed that it was commenced or started by the Greeks and Romans. You as a parent should ask, where? By whom? In what school? What are you talking about? Where? Ask for proof. You've already got one historical claim, and we're 23 seconds in.
Commenced by the Greeks and Romans.
Explicit.
Extended during the Christian centuries.
This education that he claims to be promoting, he claims extended from the Greeks and Romans through the Christian centuries. So, since we have historical records from the Christian centuries, the Catholic Church has been here the whole time. Where? Where will we see the historical evidence of the curriculum that he sells when all of this talk is over? Where will we see that set of books or courses extending through Christian history? I'm willing to say in advance that there is no such connection at all. We'll see when we take a look. Let's keep going.
By the Greeks and Romans. Extended during the Christian centuries.
Very explicit
far
claims.
beyond Greece and Rome. It was grounded in piety. It was governed by theology. It involved the deep study of the 7 liberal arts.
Okay, stop there. He claims that classical education involves, notice he says, the deep study of the classical liberal arts. The deep study of the classical liberal arts. Not superficial homeschool conference talk about the 7 classical liberal arts, but a deep study of the classical liberal arts. So when we look at the program that's being sold to homeschool parents, we'll ask, does this include a deep study of the classical liberal arts? Let's keep going.
And it gave access, therefore, to the great books that had been written.
Now there you've got the reference to the great books, which is one of the red flags. So the great books, what the great books is, and I'm just going to tell you this up front, and we'll continue to see this in future videos from other sources from the fake classical education movement. The great books is just a launching pad to book sales. Once we can get the audience to follow us along and embrace this idea of the great books, and this idea that we don't study by formal instruction, we don't study by systematic textbooks like we actually find in the writings of Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle and so on. We don't study those books. We don't study that. We study literature, stories, and so on. Once we can get the parents to believe and buy in to this idea that our kids need lots of books, that the love of reading is real education, exactly the opposite of what St. John Henry Newman said, that the love of reading, the collecting of books, the building of family libraries, buying boxes and boxes of school supplies, books, workbooks, all this is the great books tradition. We need books. Once they get a parent to that place, it's over. The catalogs come out, the credit cards come out, the boxes are shipped, and we're in business. And parents fall for it hook, line, and sinker every time. I guarantee that there will be no evidence of any connection to ancient Greece and Rome. And again, we can go back to historic writings and know exactly what they did in Roman schools. For example, we have the writings of Quintilian on the education of an orator. We can go back and read the details, and I mean details, of what Romans did to educate children. It's in Quintilian. We can go back to ancient Greece. We can read Plato's ideas about education. We can read Aristotle's works, which are the curriculum of the classical education, and we'll see if there's any connection. We'll go through medieval history, see if there's any connection. Or we'll see if we're just being duped by this marketing talk to the great books message, which leads to tons and tons of book sales. I'm going to bet that that's what we're going to see. We're going to see all of this talk, all of this reference to the past to try to give parents some assurance that they can trust that we love educational history. We're restoring things that are trustworthy and proven, so that we then come to recommended books to use, and the parents just start buying books. That's what I expect. We'll see.
And it was designed in order to cultivate the humanity of men and women, that they might be characterized by wisdom, virtue, and eloquence. There's more to say, but there it is in a kind of a nutshell. We could maybe summarize and say it's the study of the liberal arts and the great books that are given access to us by a study of those liberal arts. We talked about the cultivation in this definition of men and women, and classical education has always been focused on the cultivation of one's humanity, the cultivation of virtue, virtues like humility, love, temperance, industry, diligence. Did I say humility? We're saying it again.
Here we have an interesting reference to virtue. Now, parents won't recognize this, but I'd like to explain to you what I see when I see a reference like this to virtue. If I were to mention the classical liberal arts, and I were to name some of those arts, if I wanted to name some of the liberal arts, it would be very simple. Grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, music, geometry, astronomy. Very simple, because the 7 arts are known. When a person receives a formal education, when a person studies systematically, which is what mastery is, when we read the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, or the works of Aristotle, we see systematic minds of masters of subjects. And if you were to ask a catechized student or a master student who studied the works and mastered their content, you would get answers that reveal the presence of that formal education. For example, if I were to ask a student in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy who had studied our Baltimore Catechism course, if I were to say, "What is man?" the child would immediately recognize the question and remember the systematic answer, which is the purpose of formal education. And he would say, man is a creature composed of body and soul, made in the image and likeness of God. That's the fruit of formal systematic education. That kind of automatic, on-hand, accurate knowledge that's gained through formal study. That's how formally educated masters think and respond to questions. So if someone were to ask me to name the virtues, as fast as the word virtues enters my mind, I think of 7 virtues. There are 4 natural virtues, and there are 3 theological virtues. This is simple, systematic catechesis. The 4 natural virtues are prudence, self-control, justice, and courage. Very simple. Those are the 4 classical virtues. The 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. Anyone who's formally instructed, either in moral philosophy or in Catholic theology, will answer systematically and will show the signs of that education, which is what we desire for our children. So when we see a question asked, like, what are the virtues? And we see this sort of wandering response with the naming of random virtues, humility, love, industry, diligence. A person who is classically educated, who has studied moral philosophy, who's been catechized, simply wouldn't list virtues like that. And I know you may think that that's being picky, but that's a sign of a formally instructed, systematically developed mind. And the wandering nature of the response reveals the lack of that mastery. And that's something that parents should look at. And I know parents can't necessarily discern that because they may not know the subjects themselves. But that kind of wandering, I would say unprincipled response betrays a classical education. The 4 virtues, prudence, justice, self-control, courage, the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, charity, these things are simple and systematic and immediate in the mind of a well-educated person when we're talking about classical Catholic education. There are signs like this all through these videos that reveal the lack of such study and knowledge. For me, those are the things that give this movement away immediately. I can tell that the people involved in this movement haven't done the work of studying the subjects they claim to know. Because if they did, they wouldn't speak of them in the ways that they do. It's one thing to prepare a lecture for a recorded video or to prepare a lecture for a classroom. It's another to sit and possess the knowledge and systematically offer it when asked a question. That's what the goal of study is, to be automatic with the truth, with accuracy, with completeness, not saying too much, not leaving anything out. Do we really need to name industry and diligence as two separate virtues? It's just odd. And these are the kind of signs that allow us to see behind the appearances and recognize that there's no mastery behind these talks about classical education, because that's not how a master would talk. So I hope that's helpful. Let's keep going here.
Did I say humility? We're saying it again.
It's just awkward.
And it's involved as well the cultivation of one's affections, so that by studying those things which are true, good, and beautiful, we might grow to properly love the things that are true, good, and beautiful.
Okay, there we've looked at 3 videos, and all 3 of them have parroted this catchphrase. And again, true, good, and beautiful is a phrase taken from medieval philosophy, but this is not what true, good, and beautiful means. It's not simply talking about things that happen to be true, like political truths or facts, like arithmetic facts. That's not what we're talking about. It's talking about God himself, the object of contemplation, as I mentioned before. And you see that these talks, they always slide into these formulas, this sort of vague talk about these different ideas, as if the meaning of these things is already understood, when of course it's not understood. We're always sliding into these marketing formulas, these marketing catchphrases that are used. But what do we really say? Think about what he just says here.
Those things which are true, good, and beautiful, we might grow to properly love the things that are true, good, and beautiful, and not love the things that are not true, good, and beautiful.
That's presented as if it's self-evident, as if we already know what is true, good, and beautiful, and we don't. So when we get into the education, now we have to ask the question, okay, I would like to know what is true, good, and beautiful. Where do I study that? What source, what author, what book, where do I learn what is true, good, and beautiful? And if we look to the curriculum that this program is going to try to sell, will we find the answer to that? Do we find the actual authoritative historical source that provides us with the knowledge of what is true, good, and beautiful? Or is this just a marketing gimmick and a catchphrase? We'll see.
And it's always been an education that was designed to equip people to serve. Yes, you could receive an education like this and become self-centered. But no, it was to equip one to be able to love one's neighbor, having mastered grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the arts of language, having mastered arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music.
Now notice he talks about the goal of this education, which we'll talk about in a minute, the goal of this education coming after or being fulfilled after one has mastered, he says, mastered the 7 classical liberal arts, grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. After one has mastered the 7 classical liberal arts, then the end of this education may be obtained. So again, our question for the actual curriculum that's for sale is, where are those 7 liberal arts mastered in this curriculum? Because if we don't master them, they're the prerequisites for this goal of what he calls cultivating humanity. If the 7 liberal arts are not mastered, obviously that goal is not even possible. So where in the book sales do we master the 7 liberal arts? What are the sources? Who are the authors? Who actually teaches us those arts? Who are the masters of those arts historically? Where do we study them in the curriculum? That's what we should go look for when we look later on at what's actually being sold. So we'll take a look at that. But to talk a little bit more about this goal, notice again, as I always say, the ridiculous promises that are being made to parents. The promise being made in this video is that classical education throughout history, and if you can't discern the problem with this, there's something wrong. Classical education was the means by which people were raised to become loving servants of their neighbors. Education was the means by which men were perfected. That's what's being said here. After all, the perfection, the goal of the Christian life is faith working through love. That's the goal of the Christian life. This speaker is suggesting that that goal is accomplished by means of education. So if you get the right school program, or if you buy the right homeschool books, you then have the resources to raise a child who loves his neighbor, who serves others with humility. The booksellers will claim and will promise parents that if they see the bad kids in the public schools, the reason why those kids are bad is not because they're unevangelized or they're disconnected from the means of grace in the church. The reason why those kids are bad is because they have the wrong set of books in their curriculum. And if you buy this set of books, you will now have the opportunity to give your children the education that will make them love their neighbor and will make them humbly serve others. And that is just classic Christian moralizing. It's false. It's a completely ridiculous promise that no study program in the universe could ever fulfill. You will not be able to raise good human beings by choosing a certain set of books. That's not how human perfection works. Christ came into the world and suffered for us in order to give us eternal life. The Holy Spirit descended at Pentecost to fill us with power to be able to obey God's will. The sacraments of the church were established by Christ to be the means by which we seek grace to grow in the imitation of Christ himself. This talk about education separates human morals and what I would call human perfection from religion, from the actual sacramental life of the Catholic faith. There's no mention of prayer. There's no mention of sacraments. There's no mention of religion or faith or grace. This is just Christian moralism. This is not true Christianity. And this is part of the marketing pitch. Our program will actually bring about the fruits of the Holy Spirit. This is the kind of thing that Simon the magician tried to pull with Peter in the book of Acts. Simon the magician said to Peter, I want to give you money for the Holy Spirit. That's where the word simony or simony comes from in the church. This idea that you can buy sacred things that only God can give by his own grace. These homeschool programs are literally telling parents that you can send your money to these programs, to these publishers. You can enroll your kids in these programs, and they have the power, in exchange for your money, to give to your children fruits of the Holy Spirit. That's the ridiculousness of the promises that these book-selling marketers make to homeschool parents. And what do the parents do? They start ordering books. Your children are not going to become virtuous adults by any education. You may raise your children perfectly in the Catholic faith, and they still not become virtuous adults. That's not controlled by education. I'm a public school graduate. I went to a public university. Do you consider me to be a virtuous Catholic man? Well, what about my education? It's not this education. I didn't study the so-called great books. So what about my life? That's not how virtue and faith are produced in people. That's the work of God's grace. That has nothing to do directly with education. Now, I'm sure that if I were able to confront this speaker to his face on this, he would deny that that's what he means. But that's what they say to the parents. You can listen to all of my videos. Do I ever tell parents that if they sign up for Classical Liberal Arts Academy courses, their children are going to be saints because this is the way that saints are raised? No, that's not what I've ever explained. What I've always told parents is the reason why you should give your children a classical Catholic education is because it's your duty to give your children the best education possible. That's why. I have never made a promise about fruits that will be born in any children's lives because these children have free will. These children can only do good with God's grace. Education is not the means by which they become good. If God gives our children grace and they become good through that grace by faith and are participating in the living life, the sacramental life of the church, I should say, if they have the light of faith, then these studies will give them the greatest benefits in the pursuit of wisdom. That's the purpose of classical education. But the classical education cannot bring about that goodness. That's accomplished by grace. God alone can give that. And you see here, and I hope you see here, the separation of living a good life, being virtuous, being moral, from religion. It's not possible to be good without religion. And yet this is how they promote these resources. I hope parents notice that because you allow this stuff to get pulled off somehow. I don't understand.
Language, having mastered arithmetic, geometry,
We'll
astronomy,
see
and music,
where we
the arts
master
of
the
mathematics,
liberal arts.
having read and drunk deeply from the wells of the greatest books that have been ever written, including contemporary books.
Including contemporary books.
It would enable
That
such
just
a
means
person to serve
endless book catalogs.
capably but humbly.
And then the promise
That's what a
of
classical
virtue
education
as a result.
often has been and should be. Well, there's so much more to say. If you want to know more, I encourage you to read,
To buy a book.
particularly the book The Liberal
start
Arts
buying
Tradition
books.
by Ravi Jain and Kevin Clark. It's available
As
at
if none of this is
classicalacademypress.com.
available
It's an
online.
excellent
The only
introduction
way
to the
that you
liberal
can
arts
get
tradition.
the
It will be
answer
tough going
is
for
by
some of you
buying
at times, but
some new
boy,
books.
will it benefit you if you want to know what the classical liberal arts tradition is. There are also courses online that you can take on classicalu.com, for example. There's a course there that I teach called An Introduction to Classical Education. There are other courses on that website that are also really helpful, like the 7 Liberal Arts, featuring Andrew Kern. So take a look at the resources that are available to you and enjoy a lifelong study of the impossible, which is classical education. Thanks for watching.
So we've got some clever rhetoric, a lifelong study of the impossible, whatever that means. It's just ultimately a way to escape accountability. So what I'd like to do now is jump off this video and let's go take a look at the curriculum. We've heard all the talk. We've heard the talk about Greeks and Romans. We've heard about Christian history. We've heard about 7 liberal arts. We've heard all the talk about the curriculum. We're finished with the homeschool conference talk. Now let's go look at what's actually for sale. And this is where things just get ridiculous. So here is the program that he actually offers. This is Classical Academic Press. And if we look up here on the top, we see classical curriculum. So this is the source of this education that was commenced by the Greeks and Romans, continued through church history, and is going to continue today. So let's take a look at the classical curriculum. And what we should see, right? We should see the 7 classical liberal arts. That's what we should see. And he named them: grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy, the 7 classical liberal arts, because these need to be studied deeply. Remember, he said, once we obtain mastery of the 7 classical liberal arts, then we can pursue, or we can gain access to, the great books. And then we can learn how to actually attain a virtuous life. We can become humble servants who love their neighbors if we study deeply the classical liberal arts. So let's take a look. Let's see what we've got here. I clicked on the classical curriculum link, and when we go down, we find it's available in grades, subjects, or by series. But what I want to know is, where are the classical liberal arts? Here we have this division, and now all of a sudden, now the division is lower grammar, upper grammar, and dialectic and rhetoric are joined together. So the division of the subjects all of a sudden doesn't seem to align with what he talked about in the video. If I click on subjects, maybe looking at the curriculum through the arrangement by subjects, this will be clearer. Bible, biology, chemistry, and then we have classical education, earth science, French. There's grammar. So we have grammar. That's one of the 7 liberal arts. But then we have Greek, history, Latin, literature guides, logic. There's one of the 7 liberal arts. Math. Well, that was actually 4 of the liberal arts. Physical science, physics, poetry, preschool, reasoning and reading, rhetoric, that's one of the names of the liberal arts, Spanish, teaching from rest, whatever that means, and writing. So after all of this talk about this historical curriculum where we study for mastery the 7 classical liberal arts, and they're named grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Where are they in the actual curriculum that's being sold to the parents? Where are the 7 classical liberal arts? So we see here grammar. Well, that's the first of the 7 liberal arts, right? So let's take a look and see if this is the grammar, this is the classical liberal art that commenced with the Greeks and the Romans, continued through church history, and now continues today in classical education. Let's look at what we mean by grammar. We have workbooks, well-ordered language, level 1B, 2A, 3A, 2B, The Curious Student's Guide to Grammar, well-ordered language. Maybe on page 2. It's just more well-ordered language. So all of this talk about classical liberal arts, this is what we're talking about? We're talking about a workbook series called Well-Ordered Language. That's how our children can participate in this classical liberal arts tradition that commenced in Greece and Rome. How is this different from any other of the English grammar workbook series that are published and used by public schools. What's the difference? I see teacher editions, the well-ordered language level 4B program. Let's take a look. $50. $50 in well-ordered language level 4B, students will learn about reflexive and intensive pronouns, adverbial clauses and phrases. So we have grammatical topics of English grammar in a workbook. So for all the talk of classical liberal arts, we have an English grammar workbook, just like any public school has today. Well, let's go back. What about Greek and Latin? Because obviously the Greeks and Romans and Christians throughout history didn't study English grammar like this. So let's go back to the classical curriculum. We're at an hour now. I'll try to make this quicker. Let's go back, look at the subjects. Maybe it's in Latin. What do we find in Latin? Latin for children. Libellus de Historia. This is what people studied when they wanted to learn Latin in history. Song School Latin Book 2. Latin Monkey Match. This is classical education. These are modern books. How is this different from what's available in a secular, modern Latin curriculum? Latin Alive? Is this actually how Cicero would have taught Latin or studied Latin? Is this how Catholics in the Middle Ages studied Latin? If not, why not? Why is Latin taught in a different way using all expensive modern resources? We have DVDs, flashcards, all kinds of books, workbooks, teachers' manuals, on and on. Why isn't Latin being taught the way that it was taught to children throughout Catholic history? This doesn't make any sense. This is what it means to deeply study the 7 classical liberal arts. Let's go back and look at logic. The art of argument. The discovery, where is this Aristotle's logic? The art of argument, the discovery of deduction, the argument builder, $26, $30 books, the art of argument program. So there's a program, the art of argument. It costs $89 apparently. We have a quote from G.K. Chesterton. So if I want to learn the 7 classical liberal arts and the second classical liberal arts, which was studied by the ancient Greeks and Romans and all through Catholic history, this is what that means. This program, if I buy this program, do my children then have access to that classical education that started with the Greeks and Romans and was studied all through? Is this it? This is the program? The Art of Argument program for $88.95? Or is this just book sales? This is just book sales. Let's go look some more. If I go back to the subjects page, rhetoric. So we have Aristotle published a book titled The Art of Rhetoric. So we want to study the art of rhetoric. Aristotle published an art of rhetoric. If I wanted to master the art of rhetoric, I study Rhetoric Alive. This is how I learn the art of rhetoric, by studying this book series called Rhetoric Alive, Principles of Persuasion. So if I want to give my children the education that this Dr. Perrin talked about in this video, that commenced in ancient Greece and Rome and continued all through Christian history, this is what if I buy this book, this allows me to teach my children the art of rhetoric, the classical liberal art, the way that it was studied and taught by the Greeks and Romans and all through Christian history. That's what this is. We have some word. Notice the catchphrase words, ethos, pathos, and logos, which are called the three rhetorical appeals. What do we actually study here? The highly engaging Rhetoric Alive explores the principles of winsome speech as developed in the foremost text on persuasion, Aristotle's Rhetoric. The 15 chapters of Rhetoric Alive step through the essential components. Why? Why not study Aristotle's Rhetoric? Why not study Aristotle's Rhetoric? Watch how easy it is to study Aristotle's Rhetoric. I can go to the classicalliberalarts.com and go to this resources page where there's this whole list of books. And I can find an English translation. Watch how easy this is. I can find, Taylor Rhetoric right here. This is Aristotle's Rhetoric right here. The Art of Rhetoric, translated into English. It's free. Why can't we study this? Why do we have to study this? Why do we have to buy a book, a workbook, for $28.95 when the actual work is right here, available for free? Rhetoric reciprocates with dialectic, for both are conversant with such particulars as being common may after a manner be known by all men and pertain to no definite science. Oh, this is difficult. Maybe that's why we can't teach this in the schools. Because a teacher would have to actually be able to help a student understand Aristotle's Rhetoric. So rather than put the teacher on the spot and force the teacher to study and gain mastery so he or she could explain this and help the students to mastery, rather than that, what we'll do is just toss the rhetoric out of the way and sell this, a workbook for $28.95. This is about book sales. This is not about classical liberal arts studies. This is not mastering any education that was known in Greece or Rome or through Christian history. This is new publications, new books being sold to homeschool families with the marketing message of this timeless, proven, trustworthy. No one in history ever used these books. They're not timeless. They're not trustworthy. The books that are timeless and trustworthy are the master texts. Here's Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric. This is what we mean by the 7 liberal arts. This book teaches systematically the art of rhetoric. Mastering this book is how you master the art of rhetoric. The modern teachers in the fake classical education movement, they can't do this. They can't teach these texts. They have to make up their own texts where they pick and choose the content and just ignore the stuff that they don't understand and give this to the children. So that's rhetoric. We've looked at grammar and logic. We haven't seen any original text. What happened to the quadrivium? What happened to the 4 arts of mathematics? Oh, here's math. So this is where we're going to see classical arithmetic, classical geometry, classical music and astronomy taught, right? Okay, no, this is primary. This is Singapore math. This is just a modern book series. That's not classical mathematics. Let's look on page 2. Singapore math. I don't think the ancient Greeks and Romans or medieval Catholics studied Singapore math. Page 3. Oh, it's more Singapore math and early bird kindergarten math book. Where is classical arithmetic? Where is, all those things he talked about in the video? Where are all those studies? Where are the 4 arts of the classical quadrivium? Where are they? I'm looking here in subjects. let's try a search. If I search for geometry, what do I find? Is this it? A book about education? A book about making school beautiful? I typed geometry. If I want, okay, so what about astronomy? That was one of the 7 liberal arts, sorry. Astronomy. A book about education? That's what I get? Where do I master the 7 classical liberal arts? Maybe it's under the different grades. Let's look at the, I guess, dialectic and rhetoric would be the highest level, right? So what do we study? Chemistry, biology, earth science, Latin alive. I'm looking for some classical mathematics here. Writing and rhetoric, physics books, chemistry experiments, workbook, more chemistry, biology. Where is the study of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy? More science books, $83, $100. Latin alive, more science books, physics and chemistry, physics. I guess this is what we mean by dialectic and rhetoric. He didn't mention dialectic in that video. He talked about logic, but this must be something different. Dialectic must mean science, right? Because this is all just modern science stuff. Biology, physics. Here's the art of the argument. Here's some stuff on poetry. Here's their logic books, the discovery of deduction, the gift of the Magi, an audio book, Lord of the Rings, student guide. This is classical education. This is, where are the classical liberal arts? If any of you use this curriculum, can you tell me where I can find all of those classical liberal arts that he talked about in the video? Because this just looks like a bunch of books for sale. This looks like modern school books. 5 of the 8 pages are modern science books. Where is the 7 liberal arts? I don't see it. Let's go look at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and see where we can find the classical liberal arts. Here they are right here, the 7 classical liberal arts. Let's actually go look at the study center where all the courses are online. Let's scroll down to the curriculum and see if we can find the classical liberal arts. Oh, here they are, arithmetic and geometry, music and astronomy. Oh, there the classical liberal arts are in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Where are they in Classical Academic Press classical curriculum program? Where are they? And if you say, well, they're not in the, then what is he talking about in the video when he names the 7 liberal arts and says we need to study them for mastery? There's no way to study them for mastery because they're not taught. So why talk about them? Because it's just the marketing stuff. It's just marketing. It's just gimmick. It's just salesmanship, giving parents this sense that, oh, the doctor has knowledge of all these things. But what you need to do is just get on the website here and start ordering books. All of these books. Lower grammar, that's 1 grade. Upper grammar, dialectic and rhetoric is another grade. But let me ask you, can we cut through all the nonsense? What's going on here? What happened to the stuff in the video? It's nowhere to be found when you actually look at the book sales. Then what is the point of the video? What's the point of answering the question, what is classical education, and then presenting this? It's marketing. It's marketing. It's to present some appearance of knowledge and wisdom, some appearance of connection to Christian history, and then simply switch that out for modern book sales. And we're talking expensive books. I saw the prices of those books. I can't imagine what a program like this would cost. So we see that There's no serious interest in classical liberal arts. There's no serious interest in studying deep the 7 classical liberal arts or mastering the 7 classical liberal arts. It's just marketing talk. Once it's time to sell books, we're just selling books. The same kind of stuff you can find at any modern curriculum publisher. Public school curriculum publishers, you can find books on critical thinking and reasoning and public speaking and persuasive writing. That's just modern stuff. That's not the arts of classical education. The arts of classical education are these: classical arithmetic, classical geometry, classical music, classical astronomy. The philosophical sciences are right here. They're labeled core. Classical ethics, classical physics, classical metaphysics. Scroll up to the trivium, look at the core courses. Those are the 3 arts. We have grammar, classical grammar, which teaches English grammar. We then have Latin grammar, and we have Greek grammar. We then have classical reasoning, and what do we study in classical reasoning? We study the works of Aristotle on the art of reasoning. It's broken into 5 books because there are 5 or 6 books in Aristotle's series on reasoning, and we cover them in those courses. And then for rhetoric, what do we study? Classical rhetoric. What do we study in that course? Guess what? Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric. There's no mystery. Let's not mess around. Let's not pretend this is some kind of impossible problem to study for the rest of our lives. This is very simple, very clear, very explicit historically. Anyone who would actually read these books would know exactly what the arts are because they're talked about all through these books. But you have to actually study the classical liberal arts and classical philosophy and Catholic theology, which, by the way, we study the Catechism, the Summa Theologica, and sacred scripture. No nonsense, no smoke and mirrors, no baloney, no talk about one thing and selling of something else, no cheesy Encyclopedia Britannica props, no bow ties. This is the classical Catholic curriculum. And you may say that I'm being too harsh, but can you not see what's being done here by this fake classical education movement? I'm sorry if my criticism is harsh, but I think you'll agree that it's honest and it's accurate and it's true. It's true. You're being sold a bunch of junk. And again, modern education is so bad that this stuff might be good enough to get you through a modern education. That's not what I'm criticizing. But when they make claims that this is what people did in the past, this is a source for classical liberal arts education. If you buy these books, you're connecting your family's education to that of Christians through history. That's just absolutely false. If you want to connect your family to the history of education, Greece, Rome, all Catholic history, it's right here. It's right here. Very straightforward, very simple, no nonsense, right here. If you want to learn about the curriculum, all you need to do is go to classicalliberalarts.com, click on the curriculum link right here, and everything you need to understand is on this page. There's a video here which you can watch if you'd like to, but everything is explained right here. It's very simple. If you know it, it's very simple. It's right here on this one page. So if you're sincerely interested, all the information's there. But what we see, going back to this video on What is Classical Education by Christopher Perrin, it's just another baloney marketing video. It has nothing to do with the actual curriculum that's sold to parents. Now, as a parent, like I said, if you take these red flags that I've given you, I know you don't understand all these things, and that's fine, because you don't need to. It's simple. But if you take the red flags that I gave you and use them to check and to evaluate things that you watch and read on the internet, you'll easily be able to discern this fake classical education movement. And look, if you want to just get to it and quit messing around, enroll in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. You can enroll for free. The instructions for how to enroll, let me just show you real quick. If you go to classicalliberalarts.com, go to the Study Center. It's classicalliberalarts.com/study. The instructions for how to enroll right here. If you can't afford enrollment, all you have to do is contact me and I'll let you use the whole program for free. If you don't think I'm serious, try me. This is real classical Catholic education. You can get started and have absolute certainty that your children are studying the exact same things that were studied in the ancient Greek and Roman world all through Christian history and remain today the only source for real classical Catholic education. You can get started with this at any time. So that's enough for this video. I hope that's pretty clear. I'm pretty sure that's pretty clear. I hope you can make a good decision, and I hope that you give your children the opportunity to study the real classical Catholic curriculum, because it's not too hard for them, and it's available affordably and conveniently in the comfort of your own home every day. So if you're interested, get in touch with us at classicalliberalarts.com. Comment if you're watching this on YouTube, post a comment or get in touch with me. You can send me an email anytime at mail@classicalliberalarts.com. I hope that's helpful. God bless you all.